This is our final program in this series looking at the history of minorities on Miami Beach. The programs examined the history of the Jewish, Black, Hispanic, and the LGBTQ communities. Today's webinar will review some of the things we've learned. This project was the idea of the Miami Beach Youth Commission, a group of high school students appointed by the city government to represent and advocate for the youth of Miami Beach. The youth commissioners are with us today: Franny Gonzalez, Jake Aleman, Leandra Hall, Max Gelber, Jacqueline Schaefer, Jared Rogoff, and Jonathan Taman. Welcome, everybody, and welcome to those joining us virtually. Now, let's take a look back again. During its century of existence, the city of Miami Beach has grown from a winter playground for wealthy Gentile industrialists from the north to an international resort welcoming everyone. By looking at the groups of people who make up the story of Miami Beach, we can clearly see the changes that have occurred to make it one of the most diverse and dynamic cities in the country. The imagination and entrepreneurship of two men, Carl Fisher and John Collins, a rough and ready high roller and a quiet Quaker farmer, together made a bridge from the mainland to a barrier island of possibilities. Fisher wanted a winter playground for himself and his rich friends. Collins, ever the farmer, wanted to grow avocados and pineapples. Miami Beach became a favorite winter vacation spot for people of affluence who built beautiful homes, hotels, and golf courses. With the advent of air conditioning, the beach became a year-round attraction for its sunshine and surf. Carl Fisher, operating his land business in the 1920s, would not sell plots to Jews. And despite city ordinances passed in 1947, anti-Semitic signs remained for years. Jewish families who migrated to Miami Beach were confined to building their new lives below Fifth Street. A flourishing community of kosher groceries and restaurants, synagogues, and more modest apartment buildings sustained a vibrant community. Many were survivors of Hitler's death camps. As the Jewish community prospered here and in the north, Miami Beach became their winter resort of choice, and the city reflected Jewish tastes. Several Jewish people on Miami Beach were deeply involved in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s and started the first chapter in the South of the Congress of Racial Equality, better known as CORE. Okay, let's do a little reflecting now. Max, what did you learn in this program on Jewish history of Miami Beach?
So something really crucial that I learned was that there's deep-rooted history of anti-Semitism in our community in Miami Beach. Showed me how far-reaching it is and how much of a crucial role it played in the growth of our community. And it made me despise it a little bit, because that idea is just growing up, you think that Miami Beach is immune to this because everyone you know seems to be Jewish. Everyone you grow up with seems to be Jewish. And then this idea just that everyone was anti-Semitic years before is kind of appalling.
And Jared, what did you learn?
I learned a lot. I wasn't so aware of the discrimination against Jews as far as where they could own land. I wasn't aware that only between First and Fifth Street was where Jews owned land, and that led me to a lot of interesting discoveries, like the owners of Joe's Stone Crab were Jewish, and the founders, I should say, and the family. And I had no idea how much it took to slowly break the Jews into different parts. Like, we learned about the Martin Karp's mom, I think it was Ruth Karp, breaking into the Bay Harbor Beach Club or Surfside Beach Club that wouldn't allow any Jews in, and all these little things that Jews did in order to help them expand and be a part of Miami and not face discrimination in it, and then also help other cultures like African Americans to not face discrimination in Miami as well.
Mm-hmm. So let's continue on with our review, and the next segment is about the Black history of the beach. Black laborers cleared the land on Miami Beach and helped build much of the infrastructure, but they could not live on the beach. In the segregated South, it was off limits to people of color. After the beach started developing, Blacks were employed as cooks, waiters, gardeners, drivers, and maids, but they couldn't spend the night on the beach unless they were live-in servants. With the huge popularity of jazz in the 50s and 60s, celebrity black performers began pushing for integrated audiences in the nightclubs. Meanwhile, black and white people worked together to integrate the stores and lunch counters. In 1990, the esteemed statesman and black president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, was snubbed by the political establishment of Miami. This prompted a national travel boycott of Miami and Miami Beach. One of the demands was that a black developer be allowed to own a beach hotel. The Royal Palm was the first hotel on Miami Beach owned and operated by a black businessman, Donahue Peebles. Today, Miami Beach attracts crowds of young black students during spring break and Urban Beach Weekend. This past spring, these events raised controversy, which is still under discussion. And this controversy, which is still under discussion, is going to determine the beach policies in the future regarding large groups of tourists, but especially black tourists. This has been somewhat of a controversy. Were you aware of this, Franny?
Yes, going into this project, it was definitely something that I was aware of, and something that I really wanted to teach my fellow peers about, because every great establishment, every great city in the United States has been built on the labor of minority groups. I mean, America was built on the labor of slaves, and Miami Beach was built on the labor of the Jewish, Black, LGBTQ, and Hispanic members of our community.
Of course, the idea coming for this program is obviously there is a ignorance or a lack of knowledge thereof of our local history, because in our classes in our schools, our emphasis on history is focused specifically on the general US history, world history, European history, in fact, but never about the history within our own communities. And so I wanted to address that. And there's a kind of specific aspect of history that's kind of, I guess, not really known, which is the Black history of Miami Beach, because it is so deeply rooted in Miami Beach history, and yet it's so overlooked. It was such a travesty, because I personally did not know that Bahamian workers would clear the land, and then they actually owned the land of Miami Beach, which I thought was, wow, it was so amazing considering how small the Black population is on Miami Beach. And I think just doing this whole segment really helped me to gain an even greater understanding of Black history on Miami Beach, because there were some things that even I didn't know, despite having a lot of insight into Miami Beach's general history. And so it really signified the importance of having this program, because there's so much that even that we did throughout this program that we didn't cover. And there's so much more that still hasn't been said. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to just focus on all these different segments, and particularly with my segment being the Black history segment, to gain such insight, such knowledge to these people before us, so that we can continue to make Miami Beach a progressive and equal city for all.
Let's move on now to reviewing the Hispanic segment. Miami Beach's Hispanic history has been linked to Cuba since that country's war for independence from Spain, which began 150 years ago. Since then, Florida has been a hub of exile activity. In 1933, former Cuban President Mario Garcia Menocal lived in a stone mansion on Collins Avenue and Lincoln Road, where he plotted to overthrow the Machado government. Cubans came looking for work in the Great Depression, and after World War II, the Cuban middle class came on summer vacations to Miami Beach because of bargain prices. The 1959 revolution in Cuba caused a wave of Cubans to leave their country, thinking their absence would be temporary. Castro stayed in power, and many Cubans remained permanently in the Miami area. They took whatever jobs they could find, even though they had been professionals in Cuba. Spanish was not widely spoken then. Another mass exodus happened in 1980, when frustrated Cubans on the island were allowed to leave through the port of Mariel. tens of thousands left on boats sent by South Florida family members. Castro used the opportunity to empty his jails, sending many of Cuba's criminals with the exiles. Along with the new arrivals came a crime wave that tarnished the reputation of Cubans, adding to an atmosphere of prejudice. As more Hispanics came from other Latin American countries and assimilated into the culture, they became politically active and ran for office. Maddie Herrera Bauer was the first Hispanic and first woman elected mayor of Miami Beach. Hispanics are now involved in all aspects of the beach culture. Jackie, some reflections about the cultural identity among today's youth on the beach. Do you think they'll be interested at all in hearing about this history, Hispanic history of the beach?
I definitely think they will be interested. Personally, I've gained a lot of knowledge on Hispanic history, but not really centered in Miami Beach. I've gained this knowledge from my grandparents, and I'm sure many other Hispanic kids here have learned about that history from their countries of origin. But personally, I did not have much knowledge on the Hispanic history in Miami Beach, since my grandparents had only come much later. So I think this program is really interesting to Hispanic kids in this community, or even non-Hispanic kids, to just learn about a really big population that's in Miami Beach.
Were there any things that startled you or that you weren't aware of? You did say you learned a lot about the local history, because a lot of the history that we're taught is not local. And that's the value, of course, of programs like this. But is there anything particularly that interested you?
Yeah, I was very interested in just seeing how the population grew over time. Sometimes when you think back to how many people live here and the kind of people that live here, you just have always expected them to be here. But just the sheer amount of people that came over and the ways that they came to this country, and the crazy stories you hear, is very impressive, and it makes the large population of Hispanics in Miami Beach far more impressive.
Okay, let's move on then and have a review of our program on the LGBTQ community. Gay rights was not talked about much until a Miami Beach resident became upset because Miami-Dade County passed an ordinance protecting gays and lesbians from job and housing discrimination. The resident was Anita Bryant, a nationally recognized former Miss America contestant, a popular singer, and the spokesperson for Florida Orange Juice. She quickly formed a coalition with fundamentalist churches called Save Our Children, and launched a campaign to get the ordinance rescinded. Miami became ground zero in the fight for gay rights. Her anti-gay rhetoric succeeded, and the ordinance was rejected 1 year later. Her successful campaign, with its hate speech directed against gays, caused a rallying of the LGBTQ people unseen before. The subject of human sexuality was now a national topic of discussion. More people came out of hiding their gender and sexual identities. As the social stigma of being gay lessened, gays were able to have productive conversations which changed attitudes and ultimately laws, as they won seats in the state legislature and the local city commission. Miami Beach is now counted among the most gay-friendly cities in America. Jonathan and Franny, you were two of the youth commissioners who were involved specifically on this program. Were there any surprises? Anything that you learned that you didn't know before?
Well, one of the first things that I learned from this program is how integral the LGBTQ community was in the development of Miami Beach, and the development of our Art Deco architecture and the lifestyle and culture that we have here.
Franny, what about you?
What I was amazed by is the integral role that Anita Bryant played in encouraging members of the LGBTQ plus community to come out of hiding and actually celebrate themselves and their sexualities, and contribute to this culture of equality that we now have in Miami Beach.
Had you been aware of how much the gay rights movement was centered in Miami at the time?
Not necessarily. I had previously ridden in the Pride Parade, and I had worked on previous projects with my mother when she was on the commission, but I never knew the full extent to which we contributed.
One of the people interviewed in the program talked about keeping vigilant. What was he talking about, Jonathan?
Well, I mean, I believe that now we are more generally accepting and tolerant of other identities, but outliers still exist here and everywhere else. And there are still fights that need to be fought and goals that need to be reached. And so that's what he was talking about. Like, we can always become more accepting and aware of different identities.
Franny, do you think that your peers are accepting? We have the idea that young people today are much more accepting, but do you encounter ever anybody that's not tolerant amongst your peers?
I believe that my peers are extremely tolerant. I wouldn't keep friends who weren't. But outside of my group, especially now being exposed to so much social media, you can really see the branches of hate that have sort of rooted themselves in our society, not just in Miami Beach, but across the country.
At the very beginning, when we started the series on the first program, Mayor Gelber said that many of the groups, the minorities that were persecuted in the past, are still being persecuted. How does that make you feel?
I think it just shows us that the society still has goals to reach, and we still need to be working towards being more open and fair and equal and just respectful to each other.
What are your hopes in terms of moving peers, maybe outside of Miami Beach, towards a more tolerant society? You think Miami Beach is a good example?
I would say Miami Beach has definitely created a model for what other cities should follow in terms of diversity and inclusion, but we still have a long way to go ourselves. And if anything, I think that spurs myself and my fellow youth commissioners on to become more active in our communities and ensure that change does happen.
Does anyone else have the reaction to this series that you want to get more involved? And do you see ways where you can get more involved?
From a student perspective, there's definitely a lot of work that can be done more in like volunteer aspects. There's initiatives that you can start at your school, like clubs, just to educate people. I know personally in my school at Miami Beach Senior High, we have a lot of different clubs. Like we have a Jewish student union, and we have like a Brazilian club, and just clubs just to educate people about the different ethnicities and religions, and just different kinds of people that live in Miami Beach. And there's always work that can be done with the city. There's a lot of events and stuff that they host, and just staying involved and educating yourself helps to keep the history of the city alive and known.
Where do you see the future of Miami Beach going? Do you think, are you optimistic?
I'm very optimistic. I think we have a pretty progressive population, and we have a very active youth community. And I think everyone's really interested in keeping like the liveliness of Miami Beach very like alive and well. So I think it's a really good time to be here. And I think a lot of people are doing their best to just keep moving in a good direction with the city in general.
Do any of you have more a sense of your home after being involved with this series?
I definitely do. I would definitely go as far to say that I do, because I think to really like learn about your home, you have to learn its history. You have to understand where you came from and where it was built and who built it. And I think it's really, and sometimes the history of something or the history of your home can be good, it can be bad, and it can be ugly. But I think to really appreciate it upcoming and appreciate it in its current state and in its future state, you have to understand and accept the good, the bad, and the ugly about the history of your home. And so I think through these webinars, through these lessons, through these videos, I think I don't know, I think I've definitely gained a new appreciation about not only the history, but I think I've gained a new understanding and insight in towards the current state and the future state of Miami Beach.
Anyone else have anything to add along that line before we close?
I just wanted to add to that. Like, it's one thing just to sort of live in a place, but to fully be immersed in it through its culture, through its people, through its history is a whole nother thing. Because even though my beach has only been around for a little over 100 years, it still has such a rich and deep history that is still very much present to this day. And for me, I'm just grateful that this beautiful history is able to be shared with more and with more youth, because we can see that having a greater knowledge of our place in our community and in ourselves, we can continue to make Miami Beach a greater and better place to live. And just to dispel any ignorance regarding Miami Beach and its communities, it's just another great thing to add on to that.
This concludes our series of 5 programs on the history of minorities on Miami Beach. You can find them #MBHistory. Thanks to all of the youth commissioners and the City of Miami Beach for making this possible.